Hello, Kuma229 here with another Topic of the Week video. This week I'll be discussing spirituality in Avatar: The Last Airbender and Legend of Korra, and how Legend of Korra failed at it. This week is actually two topics that were pretty similar, so I decided to combine them. The first topic was from Tumblr user mademoiseli, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and her topic is Aang's spiritual journey versus Korra's. The second one was submitted by a Tumblr anon, and their topic is the difference in how spirituality was handled in Avatar: The Last Airbender and how it was handled in Legend of Korra. Now, I guess you can say the difference is that Avatar: The Last Airbender handled spirituality respectively, and then you had Legend of Korra handling it with only the most superficial of aspects. Alright, so talking about, let's just discuss Aang and Korra's spiritual journey. Aang's journey, Aang started off being very spiritual, so he had that going for him at the start of the series, being an air nomad and all. They were a very spiritual culture, and we saw this with his, steadfast morals, his, the understanding he had towards the spirits, especially when, gosh dang it, the panda spirit, when it was attacking the village. Ultimately Aang realized, he basically had to learn to acknowledge that yes, there was actually a reason why this was attacking, and it was actually because its forest got scorched and it was lashing at the nearby humans, instead of instead of recognizing that they weren't the ones responsible. And yes, there is the Fire Nation is responsible, and and there was going to be a new forest that would grow up in the ashes of the old. There's a lot of spiritual aspects in Avatar: The Last Airbender, and I can't go into all of them, but one of the things I think really shows this is Aang's connection to Roku. Now, the Avatar's past lives can be contacted basically via spiritualness, which is one of the reasons why Korra in the start of Book 1, or actually through pretty much all of Book 1, that Korra couldn't do that. And that was an interesting design, and I actually do, in terms of the character, that, you have her set up at such a severe disadvantage in that aspect, where she doesn't have the benefit of what Aang had, when he could talk to Roku, and Roku talked to him a lot, and explained to him a lot of stuff. And then he had, he needed contact with Kyoshi, Karuk, Yang Chen, previous avatars. We didn't see too many of them, because, well, Aang didn't really know many of them, but we do see that difference in their spiritual journeys. Now, Aang started off, well, despite the fact that he was very spiritual, he did have some pretty significant downsides to it that sort of, not completely negated it, but definitely put him at a disadvantage in terms of his character. He was very carefree, and not in a bad way, in that he basically shirked his duties. And in fact, the whole beginning part of Avatar: The Last Airbender, all these adventures they go on, you find out that, yeah, Aang's been trying to avoid being the Avatar. And it's understandable, because Aang was 12 when he was announced, 4 years too soon. And he was found out that he was going to be yanked from the man who was like a father to him, Gyatso. So yeah, obviously Aang panicked and ran, and he just couldn't handle it. As a 12-year-old, he just couldn't handle the fact that he had all this weight on his shoulders. So that was understandable, but he does end up accepting his responsibility. And that's basically what Book 1 features a lot of, is accepting that he is the Avatar and he's got a job to do. Ultimately, it concludes with him, learning waterbending, and him connecting with the water spirit, or the ocean spirit, I believe. It's little kois in the pond after Zhao kills the moon spirit. And it's weird because, basically his spirituality was a linchpin in that entire Book 1 finale. It was, in fact, he was basically meditating that whole time, and he had to be protected while his body was vulnerable, because he couldn't move, or, he couldn't move on his own. And you had people trying to attack him, and Zuko trying to kidnap him, all that fun stuff. Then in the Book 2, we see a lot of, specifically, I think the big part of this comes in Aang learning earthbending, and having to really, really think about, to change his mindset, because being an earthbender is literally the complete polar opposite to being an airbender. So he had to change his normal way of thinking just to learn, just to be able to start. So you actually see him adapting a lot there. Really, the main stuff comes in the end when he's learning with Guru Patik. I think that's pronouncing that right. I think it's Patik. But anyway, it's the guru that we saw near the end of book 2 who is helping Aang unlock the avatar state. Since that has been a constant thing, you know, despite the fact that he has great spirituality, which might even make activating the avatar state easier, he doesn't have control over it. He needs to learn to control himself. And he starts learning that, and, you know, the concept that, you know, he has to let go of his desires. He has to let go of, specifically it's framed as letting go of his feelings for Katara. Now, an interesting little side note that I want to talk about here, because I don't think a lot of people really talk about this, is that when you have Aang giving up his feelings, like when it's letting go, a lot of people think that Aang is a failure of an avatar because he ended up marrying Katara. But here's the thing. I don't believe that letting go is actually completely giving up on it and totally not having any relations at all. Because we saw that that's not even the case, because even Roku was married, and we know from Ursa, Roku had kids. So, because we know that Zuko is descendant of Roku and Sozin. So, obviously, and, you know, we saw that, you know, Roku could easily activate the Avatar state. So, obviously, it's not that, and I really believe that this is something that might not have been explained as much, and I think maybe a lot of people just had a problem because it wasn't specifically said. I don't believe it was ever completely shutting off yourself from any kind of emotions, any kind of, you know, connections, any kind of friendships, any kind of relationships. I think it's not letting it rule you. Being in control of yourself, because you need to be able to control those feelings, you need to control the Avatar state. Because you're being flooded with the power of like 1,000 avatars and all their wisdom and experience and their, you know, bending abilities. You know, yeah, it makes you super powerful, and if you don't have control over yourself, then you can't. Then there's no way you can control that. I think the issue really with him going off to save, you know, Katara and basically everyone else at the end of book 2 wasn't so much that he gave up on the Avatar state. It was sort of, it seemed like that, but really it was more so that he was letting his emotions rule himself, and he ran off. Now, again, this is also very reminiscent of Aang, or reminiscent of Luke in Empire Strikes Back, when he goes off to Bespin to save everyone because he sensed they were in danger instead of staying with Yoda and finishing his training. But again, we saw that despite that, that didn't stop Luke from becoming a Jedi, and just because Aang ran off to help everyone at the end of book 2 doesn't mean that he completely lost the ability to do the Avatar state. I mean, Guru Patik was very dramatic about that, but I don't even believe that that's the case. And because it's very much just, you know, don't let your feelings rule you. And I think that's actually something that's very important, that I think kind of gets overlooked, because I think a lot of people don't really take too much of a look at that specific idea, and that, yeah, you know, the Avatar state isn't so much a, you know, you have to become just pure spiritual, not accepting anything else, you must never have friends and never date, or, you know, just none of that, because that's totally ridiculous, and I don't even really support that idea anyway. But it's obvious that Aang could clearly use the Avatar state even after he has, you know, obvious feelings for Katara. It's just not letting it rule him. And the fact that he needs to be in control of himself before he can control the Avatar state. Okay, so now that I've gone on that tangent, you know, with book 3, one of the biggest problems with him is that he couldn't activate the Avatar state because he was, you know, he got zapped in the back, and he actually died for about a couple minutes until Katara revived him with the magical water. Now, there isn't so much about spirituality in book 3, because this is mainly it's mainly focused on ending the conflict that was going on, but really a lot of stuff that, you know, Aang needed to be learn stuff about himself, but and really calm himself down when challenging, at the thought of challenging Ozai, because that's really, that screwed him up bad for a little while. he was having nightmares over it. Which, again, it's reasonable. By this point, he's about 13. So, yeah, 13 having to grow up against, you know, a very powerful firebender who, you know, by the end of the book, you know, by the end of the season, yeah, was basically at his most powerful, powered by Sozin's comment. So, yeah. Yeah, and ultimately, at the end, we see after all the stuff he'd gone through, Aang is, you know, especially with the garb he wears, it's very, very, like, air nomad monk stuff. He's obviously in control of himself, and at that point, at the very end of the series, Aang is the fully realized Avatar. And and all the stuff he had learned, you know, all the stuff he had attained, and all the powers, and all the lessons, all came to a T when he and Zuko were, you know, working together as basically two of the biggest world leaders. Because you have Aang as the Avatar, who's super duper important, and you have Zuko, who had become the Fire Lord, who's now in charge of the Fire Nation, and is like, alright, we're ending this. So, you really saw at the end that Aang had really grown in terms of a person, in terms of spirituality. Now, by contrast, now to get back to Legend of Korra, Korra's spirituality was some of the most superficial crap I've ever seen. And it was so muddled and so poorly handled. It's a shock that Brian and Mike didn't absorb anything from the other writers of Avatar: The Last Airbender. And it's like, were you not even paying attention to your own show? I mean, even if stuff wasn't nearly as well handled, and I think a lot of people would have been accepting if, you know, Legend of Korra was just okay with it, but it was so abysmal. So, like I mentioned before, Korra started off book 1 not spiritual at all, and that's one of the reasons she couldn't do airbending, and she's too hot-headed, and she very much has the mindset of an earthbender. And which I'm actually a little surprised that stuff was never really brought up, because she's very bullheaded. She wants to tackle things head on. You know, where there's a fight, no, I'm going to stop it, I'm going to stand my ground. It's very earthbender, very, very much an earthbender mindset. So it really is, I really was expecting that to be brought up more. And in fact, it actually would have been freaking awesome if she actually at some point got to talk to Kyoshi and learn from Kyoshi how she learned airbending. Because, come on, like, this is, like, a lot of people love Kyoshi, and Kyoshi would have been the perfect avatar to bring in as a mentor to her. In which, you know, and sure, yeah, you know, Aang would have been important too, but having someone who had that same mindset. And we know from Kyoshi that she was just like, boom, I'm going to take on this no matter what. And she was like, you know, she was just as, you know, strong-headed as Korra, but, you know, she had, you know, years of experience as being an avatar on her, because she lived, I think it was 230 years. So yeah, she lived for a long time. So having her learn from someone who would have struggled with airbending, how to learn airbending, would have actually been a fantastic aspect to bring in, but didn't happen. In fact, Korra doesn't do anything spiritual at all in book 1. The show wants to make you think that, but she really didn't. But we see in early episodes, up through episode 4, that Korra is trying to do stuff. She's trying to do stuff to learn airbending. She's trying to learn the moves, and she's trying to, you know, meditate, but she can't do it. She's impatient. She doesn't want to sit down and meditate. She wants to go out and fight. So, but then, you know, we see that with pro-bending, that she starts learning how to adapt these, you know, the airbending moves that she had learned but couldn't do, because she's being put in a situation that she actually cares about, the whole pro-bending stuff. And, you know, she's actually realizing that, oh, I can dodge easier by doing these airbending moves, and oh, there's an earth disc coming at me. Okay, I can dodge, and oh wow, all of a sudden this makes sense to her. And that honestly was actually super brilliant. I love that idea in Legend of Korra. The, merging the old with the news, and you want this, you know, deeper element of the cultural aspects of it, cultural and even spiritual aspects. Merging these two mindsets that, you know, Tenzin is very much stuck in the past. He's very, no, you have to do things the way that I was taught them. You have to, this is the way the air nomads learned. And Korra just doesn't think like that. So, adapting, you know, pro-bending. And pro-bend, that would have given pro-bending super, super, super importance in the plot if it was integral to her learning airbending. That would have, but it then ended up dropping it after episode 4, which or specifically episode 3, I believe, Or no, gosh dang, it wasn't even episode 3. It was episode 2. Man. Yeah, A Leaf in the Wind. Yeah, that's... Yeah, but still, yeah, it's all that stuff. And, the last time she meditates really is in episode 4. And I'm not talking about, like, an out of mind or... That one episode where she's trapped in the cell after Tarlok captures her and she basically starts meditating. Yeah, that doesn't count because it literally, she just sits there for 2 seconds, boom, she automatically gets all the important plot relevant information. Convenient much. But, these ideas that it introduced, the concepts of meeting the new with the old, and, you have these old spirituality, basically helping Korra by learning both. And she really could have been a bridge between the old and the new in a lot of ways, like the Avatar is the bridging between the spirit realm and the mortal realm, the spirit world and mortal world. The Avatar is a bridge, and have Korra being a bridge between, the older generation like Tenzin and the younger generation like Bolin and Mako, and the pro-bending, sport and culture. That actually would have been a brilliant aspect to bring in, because it really would have given Korra... It would have given a lot of the more modern aspects of Korra much greater significance if Korra was bringing together these two aspects, which really would have done wonders for her character, but of course that didn't happen. Now, like I said, the last time we see Korra actually meditate is episode 4, and that's it. Because after episode 4 is when really the love drama starts coming up. And any time you would expect the plot or Korra's development as an airbender would be coming along, you'd have this stuff with Korra and Mako coming in for no reason and out of completely nowhere. I mean, it's like, yeah, you had Korra's feelings for Mako because she had a crush on him. Understandable. He's the, he's the hot Bishonen guy, and, she's a new, girl who's basically been living in a compound her whole life. So, all of a sudden meeting this really attractive guy. Okay, fine, I honestly wasn't even mad that she had a crush on him. I'm just mad that her, poor actions related to it were validated. But that's an entirely different issue that doesn't have to do with the spirituality. The only times that Korra does anything remotely spiritual in the show past book 4, because another thing in book 4 is that's when she actually starts admitting to Tenzin her deep fears about Amon and losing bending, and that was super important. That could have helped her develop her spirituality by surrendering her pride in order to acknowledge that she is not all-powerful, but that she can't simply handle everything on her own, that she needs to give in, and she needs to understand that the lessons that Tenzin teaches her, the meditation, that patience yields focus, that these things are actually really important to becoming the Avatar, and she could have grown more spiritual because of that. Obviously not losing her personality, but becoming a more level-headed person would have really been great for her character. But it didn't happen. So again, alright. The only thing that she did that was spiritual after episode 4 was when she was captured by Tarlok, and she just decides to start meditating, and all of a sudden this information that she'd gotten little glimpses of, and I kind of like this idea that Aang was trying to talk to her, but she was so blocked off with her lack of spirituality and her lack of understanding and her lack of any kind of humility that he couldn't quite get to her. He could get these flashes into these certain moments. But when Korra sits there and gets the entire story about Yakone, and it's just like, it felt so forced. I mean, it didn't feel that way when I was first watching it, but when I went back and rewatched book 1, I was like, she just gets this entire exposition dump, and it would have been better, it really would have actually been better had when she done it, Aang appeared, and he's like, okay, Korra, finally, you did this. Congratulations, high five. But, okay, I got some stuff to tell you about Yakone, because this is kind of related to the situation you're in right now, and it's important to having understanding. I mean, that's one of the biggest problems here, is that we don't actually see any past lives until the very end of book 1. Where Korra doesn't even earn anything. She doesn't change. I mean, she unlocked airbending out of being mad about that Mako was in trouble. She unlocked it out of her lure for Mako, and she was angry, and she punched airbending. She punched, and it's like, that's not how airbending works. No spirituality involved. No mindset change. Literally the same bullheaded punch everything until the problem goes away mindset. And Korra just unlocks airbending. I mean, it's like, if there was at least some way where if she had locked some bit of spirituality that she can contact her past lives, and Aang and Kyoshi or someone gave her tips on how to unlock airbending, and they basically taught her to calm down, or it would freaking great if, you know, it would be great if Aang was basically there during the latter part of the season, sort of like, he could have these moments where he appeared and he was talking to Korra, and he's just like, you need to calm down here, you need to relax, you need to change your mindset. Or, you know, Kyoshi, like I mentioned before, you know, in moments where Korra was getting these, you know, this advice from her past lives, in some way, shape, or form would have been great, but they didn't happen, and Korra doesn't change, she doesn't gain more spirituality. She continues along the same path she always does. And at the very end, she goes sitting at the cliff, moping like she usually does, and, you know, because that's just what she does. She goes and mopes on cliffs. She did that in Air Temple Island right before Bolin, Asami, and Mako came up, and they're like, hey, we're new Team Avatar. Which I wish they actually did become, but, you know, Korra's sitting there and she's crying, and then Aang shows up and he's like, well, you know, when we're at our lowest, that is when we're open to the greatest change. It's like, thanks for that cheap, worthless fortune cookie nonsense, because that doesn't actually mean anything to Korra's character. Because Korra didn't make any... If Korra had made an effort of when she was if she was meditating on that cliffside, if she's thinking, she's, you know, accepting, you know, that she's not... that, you know, being the Avatar is a greater duty. If she was accepting that she had to open her mind to other possibilities other than her basically relying entirely on her bending since she had lost it. And then Aang showed up, I wouldn't nearly have been as mad about that. But the fact that she just sits there was like, I lost my bending, I only have airbending now, and what do I do with airbending? And then Aang's just like, hello, I'm here to be your Deus Ex Machina. It's like, and then, oh yeah, by the way, here's, you know, your bending back, here's energy bending, and here's the fully controlled avatar state, free of charge. And then Aang's like, look at all other avatars, we had to work for our stuff, but not you, Korra, because you're special. And there's no change with Korra. She doesn't change, you know, despite the fact that, you know, Tenzin's sitting there kissing her feet, it's just like, you have become a great avatar. And it's like, no, she hasn't. She didn't even defeat Amon. Amon was killed by Tarlok in the insanely unnecessary murder-suicide that was portrayed as a good thing because, you know, hey, you know, if you're a bad person, just blow yourself up, you know, just kill yourself because, you know, you're basically worthless and you're never going to do anything good because that's the lesson that you should be teaching, right? Oh yeah, you know, you screw up, just kill yourself because no one wants you around. I know, Bryke, we're trying to be deep, but gosh, the implications are horrendous. Now, anyway, going into Book 2. Book 2, this is even worse, because Book 2 is literally called Spirits. And what does Korra learn? Reach deep within yourself and you can turn into Godzilla. That's basically all that happens. I mean, despite the fact that she's with Unalaq, who is supposed to be spiritual, and Korra just picks stuff up without any, you know, actual learning. Because the whole, you know, the spirit water bending thing, and which just was never explained. I was literally watching Book 2, waiting for an explanation. And we didn't get any. It literally is just spiritual water bending. And Korra just does it. Not even an explanation from Korra like, oh, I figured it out. It's just, she does it. How? How does this work? Unalaq doesn't even sit there and talk to Korra about this. There's no moments where they talk about this. And, you know, Korra just runs around in Book 2. That's all she does. She runs around in Book 2. She gets into fights and she threatens a judge. Oh my gosh, I forgot that happened in Book 2. For some reason I had that mind in Book 3, but no, it happened in Book 2. When she knows this guy's bad, but instead of actually trying to prove it, she grabs the guy and she shoves his head into Naga's mouth, and she's basically like, give me the information I want or I'm gonna murder you. And it's like, isn't that like evil? Isn't that like a bad guy thing? No, Korra can get away with it because she's the Avatar and she's the main character. And okay. And ultimately, her only it's funny when she watches Aang. Oh yeah, she gets amnesia in the I think midway through the season. And it's like, oh yeah, great. This is very helpful to her character. And then she ends up seeing Wan's backstory, which I've already talked about that. If it wasn't attached to the Avatar lore, it would have been a solid 2 episodes. Except it was, and it contradicted pretty much everything we learned about the Lion Turtles in the Age Before the Avatar at the end of Book 3 of Avatar: The Last Airbender. But what you gonna do when Riker in charge? And then one of the most infuriating aspects for me in Book 2 was when Korra goes to the spirit world, and she is... Because now you can just go to the spirit world. You don't have to, you don't have to be very spiritual. You don't have to work for it. You can literally just walk through a portal. Portals that didn't exist and just... But she meets Iroh, and Korra gets turned into a little kid. And on one hand, this could have worked if it was handled properly. That Korra, in all her attitudes, is really just a child. And that if she was growing up throughout this journey... It would have been interesting. She starts off as 4-year-old Korra, who's actually super insecure and super, scared. And she grows up to be like a 10-year-old Korra. And then we have a 13-year-old Korra. And then our 17, 18 or so. I don't remember the exact age she was in Book 2, but... basically a late teens Korra. And you see as she's growing, as she's learning these lessons with Iroh, it would have been great. But, they brought back Iroh for nothing but pandering fan service to be like, hey, look, we brought back one of your favorite characters. Please like our show. But if she was learning these lessons and she grew up as she was learning it, that would have been interesting. But she stays a kid the whole time. Then all of a sudden, boom, she's an adult. She's in her teens again, and she's now at a regular age, and she's learned all of these lessons, and it didn't feel earned. It just felt like it was there to act spiritual, and I already talked about spirits in, Legend of Korra, but, in the last, Korra video I did, but, it felt so cheap, and I remember when I was watching, I saw everyone praising that as, oh my gosh, this is so deep, this is so brilliant, this is such great character development for Korra, but she doesn't change because she remains as that little kid the whole time. And then, boom, all of a sudden she's back to her normal self, and she's like, I've learned lessons. And that's basically what that little arc amounted to. And then when, at the end, we get the biggest slap in the face in terms of her character arc, when she decides that she's going to leave the spirit portals open, despite the fact that Wan closed them because the spirits and the humans literally couldn't get along without trying to kill each other, or the spirits doing horribly disfiguring things to them, or the humans trying to kill spirits and eat them. But, they were killing each other, they were doing horrible things, and it's like, obviously this is not something, we need to, stop this, because they have 2 different worlds. You have the spirit world and, the mortal world, and this is stuff that needs to be separate. And we saw this because even in Avatar: The Last Airbender, when we saw these spirits encroaching on the, the mortal world, crap happened. So, obviously, Wan was making the right decision to close them off, to prevent all the horrible stuff from happening, especially when you have, I talked about this before. Especially when you have spirits like freaking Ko the Face Stealer. Yeah, that's kind of stuff you want to keep away from your average person in the mortal world. So there's obviously great dangers in the spirit world. So let's just keep them separate, because that's what's going to be needed for peace. Because, despite the fact that there are good spirits, the spirits function on an entirely different morality, set of morality. So obviously this is not something that's going to work out, trying to shove them together. And then Book 2 is just like, and it's like funny, that's what the whole thing about the whole backstory with Wan is. It's like, he had to make this decision to close it because, all this crap going on with Vatu and, all that all the the bad spirits that exist, and all the violence that will happen if these humans and spirits continually are forced to interact. Yeah, you know, he made the right choice. Then Korra's like, I'm gonna open it because the Avatar doesn't have the right to make these decisions, despite the fact that the Avatar is the bridge between the spirit world and the mortal world. Wait, it was like when I watched it, I was like, wait, what? They don't have the right to... What do you mean you don't have the right to make that decision? That's literally your entire job. And this came across as entirely as Korra just going, you know what, I'm tired of this job. You know, this is too much work, so you guys figure it out. I'll unleash the spirit world onto the mortal world. And yeah, we saw at the beginning of book 3, yeah, this was causing severe trouble because you had spirits invading and, you know, destroying buildings and stuff. But Korra's just like, why are you blaming me? You know, I didn't do anything. The only remotely spiritual thing Korra did in book 2 was she sat in that tree and she's just like meditating, and she's just like, she reached into her own power after she lost her avatar. Or no, not after, but you know, she reached into herself and she found her own power, and she grew up into a 100-foot tall Korra and battled Unavatu, the Dark Avatar, in the Bay of Republic City. And you're just sitting there like, is this a kaiju battle? Yeah, even Avatar The Last Airbender did the whole kaiju battle thing better in the book 1 finale. But then you're having the battle for the existence of the world, you know, in book 2, and you don't even, it's like, and despite the fact that they're going up against a supposedly spiritual villain, nothing spiritual comes up, and book 2 was just awful. Then you have book 3, and what spiritual things happen in book 3, well, yeah, basically a repeat. Lack of spiritual stuff. But oh, don't worry, because we have Zahir saying some air nomad, you know, proverbs and, you know, and quotes. And he can fly because he believes in himself. Oh, there's a reason why when book 3 first started airing, I literally had just an aneurysm trying to watch it. It was so stupid. Even just keeping up with it and checking out what was going on in the episodes was just so stupid. Korra's big conflict with the Red Lotus seems like something that would actually be really dramatic, but really wasn't. Even when Korra was like poisoned and like she was hallucinating stuff, it's like, there's nothing spiritual going on here. I think even a lot of people who like book 3 describe it as more of a popcorn superhero flick. And if you're supposed to have something based off of Eastern cultures and mythologies, or at least heavily inspired by it, along with a lot of martial arts and, you know, spirituality, the last thing a show should be is described as a popcorn action flick. Book 3 really pisses me off. And at the end, Korra ends up in a wheelchair and just... yeah, that's it. She's in a wheelchair and life sucks for Korra. So let's cut to book 4 after the time skip. Korra's out of the wheelchair. Korra gets, you know, the poison metal taken out of her, and hey, all of her PTSD is gone. So just even the whole, you know, possibility of them developing her, gaining spirituality and learning from her past traumas and becoming a stronger person. Nope, all gone, because Korra can't suffer for more than a few episodes, really. And nothing, no consequences of anything that happens to her can last for very long. Now, Korra did make some decisions, you know, in book 4. She did try and negotiate with Kuvira, but don't worry, Su Yin, our resident Mary Sue, is here to screw things up and try to kill Kuvira, who's like a daughter to her, because reasons, and getting herself captured and causing Kuvira to make a move because stupidity. And what spirituality does Korra do? Again, Like, anything after book one. Book one had some spirituality in it. It wasn't deep. It was a lot of superficial stuff, but at least it tried to have some of it. The other seasons, it's like, you can't even do anything remotely truly spiritual in this, because everything is so focused on trying to be action heavy and looking cool, because that's what Bright do. They like stuff that looks cool, which is totally fine as long as you're not trying to make yourself be super deep, but the problem is that they wanted it to be super deep. Korra's whole, quote, spiritual journey was totally bunk from the very beginning, because Korra never had a spiritual journey. She ended up being the same person she started out as. Constantly, any development that she could have gotten, any tiny bit of development that she got, was completely reverted back almost as soon as possible. And we see even in the Turf Wars comic that any bit of development she had in book 4 is gone, especially now that they've replaced it with their new political pandering, because that's the only people who will be into it. And it's like, you're trying to portray this as a lot of spiritual stuff, but dropping some vague stuff, it's like, it doesn't work, because you saw with Aang. Aang had development throughout the series. Aang had great development from the beginning of book 1, The Boy in the Iceberg, to Sozin's Comet Part 4, the book 1 premiere to the book 3 finale. Aang developed. Aang had spirituality. And sure, there wasn't spirituality in all of the show, because there is more to it than just that. But Aang had development. Aang grew more spiritual and grew as a person, grew as a character, grew as the Avatar throughout the series, and Korra never did that. Because Brian and Mike aren't capable of these long-standing plot lines. They're not capable of developing. It's like they are so blindsided by their own desires, like when they wanted a ship to happen, like when they forced Makora down our throats in book 1. It's like, this is true love, and it's like, okay, but fine and dandy, but what about the whole plot line with the Equalists? What about Korra learning airbending? You're just gonna rush this in the finale and being like, oh, well, she has airbending, and so the Equalists decided to just say, you know what, we don't really care anymore, and don't worry, she gets her bending back, she gets the Avatar state, and she gets energy bending, masters all of them, and everything's good. And that was the entire, basically, mindset of stuff with Legend of Korra and what Bryke were going with, as opposed to Aaron has and the other writers with Avatar The Last Airbender. You have this genuine care for spirituality in Avatar The Last Airbender. You have this genuine care for the cultures that they're referencing and they're taking inspirations of, and the mythologies that they obviously took inspiration from. And then you have Legend of Korra, which is like, we're just going to take some aesthetic stuff and stuff that looks cool, but we're really not going to be doing anything with it. And it's so infuriating, because Avatar The Last Airbender is so good. And man, now I really want to go back and rewatch Avatar The Last Airbender. It's like, you had so much care put into the structure of that story and everything that was going on. And then you have Legend of Korra, which was trying so hard to... It was so pretentious. It was a popcorn action flick that would make even the most cheesy of 80s Arnold Schwarzenegger movies seem like they were Shakespeare. And then you have Avatar The Last Airbender, which set the freaking bar for kid shows. And honestly, it's right when people say that's one of the greatest American cartoons ever made. I mean, it was groundbreaking, really. And hardly anyone has been able to come close to Avatar The Last Airbender did. You rarely see that. And, and there are shows that started off good, but then just kind of fizzled out. And, that's why you really can't make, judgments on a show until it's over. It's like, it's rare that we get a show like even Gravity Falls, which is a fairly recent show that was very well written, because, so many times a writer just don't put that care and that focus and that work into making a story good. And that's why the spirituality in Legend of Korra fails, where the spirituality in Avatar The Last Airbender works. It comes down to respect and care for what you're writing. And this happens with a lot of writing stuff, and it comes heavily in how much work are you willing to put into to make it good. Because any writer can pop out something that seems alright, but ends up being crap, because you just work on it, you just put a few thoughts, yeah, it's fine. But if you really want it to be good, I mean, I've seen these the planning state, like, stuff for Avatar: The Last Airbender, they had these, like, giant whiteboards, and it's constantly full of writing and all these events and all these things and these notes and this stuff, just, like, and that's the kind of care you need to put in. If you really want the show to be good, if you really want it to have that recognized, if you want something like spirituality, which is something that's very difficult to actually put in, you know, if you want it to be good, you need to put that work into it. You need to put that care, and you need to really think about it, and not just go put it in and go, yeah, this will make us super deep, man. Like, totally. No, it's just, you can't do that, and that's what Bright did. And that's why Legend of Korra failed so miserably. Spirituality is just one of the many things it failed on, and it was handled so poorly. You know, I really think that's about it for today. I think this video might have been a little bit longer than I had intended, but there's a lot to talk about when it comes to spirituality within the Avatar franchise, and how it was handled great in Avatar: The Last Airbender, and how it was handled poorly in Legend of Korra. So, if you want to submit a topic to me, you can send me an ask on Tumblr and do topic : then whatever topic you want me to talk about. Or you can just comment below on YouTube for whatever topic you want me to talk about. Just make sure you follow the rules that I'll be posting down below on both Tumblr and YouTube. If you want to watch last week's topic video, you can check that out here. If you want to watch next week's topic video, you can check that out here when I get that done. And thank you for watching.